back for business. Alright, so I read the instructions, or at least I read enough of them to know, or to make sure, and I was relatively sure, that I was doing the right thing, but I wanted to make absolutely sure. A lot of people joke about men and say, oh, you don't need the instructions, or you're not a man if you read the instructions. I'm sorry, but you really should read the instructions. I mean, do you need to read the part where it says that you'll burn your house down? You know what? Some idiots do. So, one of the things I wanted to check was to make sure that the Teflon tape or PTFE tape was proper. And it is. Because you don't need... Because these are national pipe thread and tapered fittings, and brass going into steel on this side and brass going into brass compression fitting on the other side, you don't really need to put Teflon tape on these. But I don't want to have to crank these things down like I'm doing head bolts on a diesel engine. I don't want to do that. So I have a whole ton of Teflon tape, because Teflon tape comes in every single plumbing thing that you buy nowadays because of shitty Chinese hardware. So there's that. Now, like I said earlier, now the fuel is left-handed, so you'll get it's left-handed. Okay. Use a wrench to tighten these. So here's a real funny joke here, right? One of the only wrenches I have that's not Snap-on. Because I never use them a whole lot. This Craftsman wrench is probably from the 1980s. It's one of my first tools. At the latest, could be from the 70s. But it still works. I don't want to put that on. Now this one is right-handed threads, because this is oxygen. And that goes for pretty much all. Fuel is always left-handed, because you don't want to mix your oxidizer up with your fuel. You also notice I'm using a wrench. I mentioned that. Don't use an adjustable wrench. Save that for the tanks, even though I have an actual tank wrench. If you can have the opportunity to buy a tank wrench, just buy a tank wrench and just hang it on your tank. It's one of those stupid little things that whenever you need to change a tank, you can never find what you need. All right, so those are the flashback arresters. You absolutely, positively should run flashback arresters on your torch. Now, the chances of a flashback going all the way back into the tank and causing a problem are minuscule. But what will happen is that you can have a flashback that'll run back into your regulators and blow the diaphragm out of the regulator. And then all hell breaks loose at the torch head. I've had that happen, and that was the point when I decided that I needed to buy and install flashback arresters. And I'll show you. Here it is, right here. This is what happens. This is my working pressure for acetylene, and this is my Chinesium pressure regulator. And it blew the pressure regulator apart, so I could no longer regulate the working pressure of my torch, and that's part of the reason I junked this. Now, I didn't take that regulator apart yet to see that, but I know for a fact that I had a couple pretty good flashbacks. I know I had flashbacks with that shitty Chinese torch, because it was either sucking air or wasn't pushing enough acetylene for the tip that I was running. Most likely a little bit from column A, a little bit from column B. If you're running a cutting torch, or if you're running a cutting or heating torch, and you're getting a lot of pop 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 pop, you're either sucking oxygen or you're sucking air, ambient air, in through either this joint or this joint, or around the tip head, and that'll cause it to pop 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 pop, and it's usually a pretty big pop. And it scares the shit out of you if you're not used to it, and it's just unnecessary. It's unnecessary. It should never do that. If it's doing that, then you have a problem, and stop doing what you're doing and investigate why it's doing it. In my particular case, it was a combination of issues. I wasn't producing enough acetylene out of the bottle, and I was sucking air in places that I shouldn't have been sucking air. And that's a problem. And it's dangerous. And you know what? It's kind of inconvenient. So I've got a little bit of a fetish. These torch, it's probably gonna take me forever to get these right, because one of the things that drives me completely batshit crazy, insane in the membrane, is torch hoses that are twisted at the torch, so you can't comfortably hold the torch. And that's one of it. It's right there. All right, so this, I'm gonna leave this loose so I can rotate it to get it exactly how I want the torch. I love torch welding. It's one of my greatest goals in life, was learning how to actually weld with a torch. And one of the things of welding with a torch is you need to be comfortable when doing it. I mean, you need to be comfortable whenever you're welding, but when you're torch welding, you want to be totally comfortable, and you need to have control of the valves. Okay, if you can't control the valves, while you're working the torch, then it's just difficult if it's not set up the same way. I actually run my torch this way, so I can work the valves with my fingers. So when I'm welding, I'll run the torch upside down, like that. And then you can adjust the tip however you want, tighten it down, and you're good to go. But I like to run mine this way. So my poop, propane oxygen, or fuel oxygen. So when I tighten these up, I want these to be as perfectly straight as they can be, and in line with this here, so it's not twisty all the time. It's it's one of my crazy pet peeves, and for whatever reason, I corrected it every time I got into torches. Every shop I've ever worked in, the torches were twisted. The handle was twisted, and it drove me fucking crazy. And then I fixed it. Well, the funny thing is I fixed it. I took it all apart one day. At the last shop I worked at, I took it apart and I fixed it. And the whole time I was fixing it, was getting bitched at by the boss. Why are you doing that? You're wasting time. It was always, I'm wasting my time. And when I got it all finished, when I finally got it finished, because it took a little, it takes a whole precious 15 minutes to fix the problem, and it is a problem. Well, all of a sudden, magically, oh wow, what happened to the torch? That's pretty close to right there. I probably could clock it a little bit more, but I think that'll work. And then I'll even run them up even further, because I want this torch to be comfortable in my hand when I'm using it. I don't want to be fighting it, ever. As a matter of fact, the one day I went and I reclocked this, because my old shop, we never used the heating torch, heating tip. We always used the cutting tip, which is stupid. You don't need to do that. That's what heating tips are for. So I reclocked the cutting tip, and I got bitched at for doing that because I touched something. It is what it is. I worked for assholes my whole life. Raging assholes. Now, we're going to get up here to the gauge side. Stick that in the trash right there. And these hoses have a certain amount of split on them. Sadly, because of the difference between the height of my tanks, I run giant oxygen tanks because I used to blow glass, and I'm paying rent on these giant oxygen tanks. And oxygen, when blowing glass and cutting, you generally use 3 times as much oxygen as you do fuel. So I always run big oxygen tanks and small fuel tanks. I don't do a whole lot of this, so in the end of the day, I may end up getting a bigger... If I decide I want to do more of this ironworking, I might step up my game with my acetylene tank or go to a MAP gas. But I don't really think that's an issue. Now here's another one, is the argument of which way do you wrap Teflon tape. Well, I wrap it whatever way it wants to go on. I'm sure some plumber or engineer or YouTube know-it-all will tell me I'm doing it wrong, but the one thing you definitely don't want to do is you definitely don't want to get Teflon tape into your anything, so I'm going to peel that back. So there's no Teflon on the mating surface because this is actually a mating surface. You don't need to use Teflon tape. You don't need to use Teflon tape with this type of fitting, like I said, but I do. The other thing you need to do is once you get this snugged down, okay, and that's snug, you got to get another wrench. If you just try to snug this down with this wrench, you're going to spin this and cause a leak. These should be tight from the factory, and it looks like they have thread sealant on them. You don't want to get into gauges. You know, unless you're a again, unless you're some kind of expert, which the internet's full of them. Unless you're some kind of expert, don't fuck around with the gauges. It's really just not, there's no advantage to it. If your gauges are fucky, just throw them away and get new ones. But you also don't want to damage the ones that you have. And putting them together for the first time is a great way to damage them. There we go. Tight and tight. And then, like I said, I'm going to end up... See, these come apart. They're very lightly glued together. It's interesting to me. Yeah, made in USA. Coupled with 1-inch long ferrules, made in the USA. I threw the other shit in the garbage because I didn't want to be tempted to use that Chinese junk for anything, because it was so bad. It was dry rotted all the way through. And it was only a couple years old. I bought those hoses brand new at Harbor Freight, and they were shit. I think another problem with my old set was it had spent some time outside, and they don't like to live outside. This new stuff will never be used. It'll be used outdoors, but it won't ever be stored outdoors. And unless there's some kind of natural disaster where I have to cut something, I'm probably never going to use it. I'm probably never going to use it in inclement weather or anything like that. My days of that shit are over. laying underneath a plow truck at 2 o'clock in the morning. Laying under a plow truck at 2 o'clock in the morning because some drunk smashed into a parking bollard. Or, let me rephrase that. Some coked up drunk smashed into a parking bollard with his plow. Those days are, over as far as I'm concerned. And that wasn't me. It was several different occasions I was doing that kind of shit. Okay, that's basically it. I'm going to I'm going to go put these on, and I'll cover how to do that too. But I need to move, and I want to finish my cigarette before I start fucking around with acetylene. Acetylene doesn't scare me as much as propane does, but one of the few things you probably shouldn't smoke around.